I first heard Gentle Giant on the John Peel programme, when he played the title track from the LP, presumably around the time of its release in 1975. The opening piano figure immediately drew me in, and I've been listening ever since. Not long after this, I bought a copy of the LP on a school trip. OK, not a school trip exactly, more of an unofficial field trip to a nearby market town, where news was that a record shop was closing down. A field trip with a friend, followed by refreshment in a pub, open in the afternoon because it was cattle market day. Possibly teachers and parents were unaware of this field trip. It was a scorching day and we returned on the bus with bags of bargains, mine also including Soft Machines bundles. A fortuitous day. Back at home, I put on the headphones and dropped the needle on the record, hearing the opening finger clicks bounce from side to side in the stereo picture, followed by the interlocking riff on piano and guitar, also panned left and right. Then the rhythm section crashed in, Ray's wonky bass riff anchoring everything down, and on it went, consuming me. I listened again and again to the record that summer, made friends listen to it, and tried to pick out bits and pieces from it on the piano. So I want to take you through this remarkable record, and if you're new to it, convert you to its delights, and if you know it, perhaps to shine some new light on it. The background to the LP. The band had made 4 LPs for the Vertigo label, after which the senior of the 3 Shulman brothers, Phil, left. The last of these LPs, Octopus, saw the recording debut with Giant of drummer John Weathers. The group continued as a 5-piece and made In a Glass House, an excellent record, which saw the musical elements start to crystallise into their mature sound, which would be further elaborated in the next 3 releases. They survived the change and loss of their main lyricist, recorded In a Glass House, and really hit their stride on The Power and the Glory from 1974. It had been fairly successful. In the Zigzag interview, Derek felt it had done very well in the States, in the charts. Their recording method was now established, and good ideas were executed with vim and vigour in the studio. It's the first non-transitional album, line-up-wise, since their second. Derek Shulman says of The Power and the Glory, that was the Giant grown up. Gary is perhaps the dominant player, stamping his sound across the LP. However, it was also an LP with some pretty challenging material. And it seems there was some sort of conscious decision made to focus the writing a bit more on what would become Freehand. Ray said in retrospect, Power and the Glory could have been more tuneful. The band began 1975 with a recording for German television made in Belgium, followed by a series of 22 dates in North America and Canada. From Skelly's information, there's nothing definitive between February the 17th and April the 25th, a period of 67 days. Kerry Minnear says Freehand was written, rehearsed and recorded in just 42 of these. Gary describes the mood in the camp as, we felt like we were on our true course. We were skidding along on a huge wave, a free hand, you know. John Weathers, interviewed about the LP, described the context of its making as being one where they were under new management, they were getting good reviews, playing great gigs, starting to headline 5,000-seaters. He says, we were really up for it, wanted to go for it. We had a bit more time to actually prepare for this album, especially rehearsal time. It was written pretty quickly, as Ray and Kerry always did, but more time to rehearse meant that I actually knew what was coming, so it tended to flow. A new record deal had been struck with Chrysalis Records, ending a period where the band was signed to worldwide artists. Chrysalis was founded by Chris Wright and Terry Ellis, originally as Jethro Tull's management company, with their initial releases licensed to Island Records. Their deal, with Chris Blackwell at Island, included an agreement that if they had a hit, they could have their own label. Giant had toured with Tull in 1972, and so connections made then served them well. We initially met Terry on our first European tour, says Ray. We were immediately impressed with the professionalism of their operation, and when things went sour with WWA, we met up with Terry. He introduced us to his partner Chris Wright. We got on well, and they were keen to sign us. From their point of view, we were a safe bet. We already had a very loyal fan base, and each record recouped its advance. From our point of view, and for similar reasons, it meant that they'd leave us alone to do our own thing. Freehand was recorded at Advision Studios in London. The band were familiar with the place, having recorded most of their previous records there. Advision had been set up in the 60s by Guy Whetstone and Stephen Appleby, originally mostly doing voiceovers and jingles for television advertisements, presumably the reason for the name. Originally in New Bond Street, by the time Giant started using it, it was in Gosfield Street, just off Great Portland Street in West London. It was one of the first studios to have an 8-track machine, with subsequent upgrades to 16 and then 24-track. In the 70s, a lot of progressive music was recorded there. Besides Giant, Yes recorded Close to the Edge there, ELP made Tarkus and Brain Salad Surgery, and Soft Machine 5, 6 and 7 were all done there. The record was engineered by Gary Martin, with Paul Northfield assisting. Northfield would go on to engineer their next LP, Interview, and later, among many others, in Absentia for Porcupine Tree, providing a Giant link via guitarist Steven Wilson. Martin was engineer on Yes and Soft Machine records done at Advision, and in between these and Giant's 2 previous LPs, he'd also recorded Rock On for popster David Essex, by way of variety. By 1975 and their 7th LP, their recording process was well established and well disciplined. John says, "We worked hard, it wasn't party time." Having learned the material and rehearsed it, the pieces were recorded live, and if a satisfactory take had not been achieved after 2 or 3 attempts, they would move on to another piece. The aim of this was to retain a spontaneous feel. Once a good take had been captured, everything but the drums and bass would be stripped off and all the other parts overdubbed. Mixing, in the analogue era, was a manual process, a mix being essentially a live take. John says, "Everyone was involved in the mix. I was very happy with the final mix on the record." Influences. In interviews with band members, they're at pains to say they did not really listen to their contemporaries. At least Ray and Kerry both say this. But music doesn't spring from nowhere, and there are sources and inspirations for their styles. The Proclamation newsletter reprinted some promotional material from their WWA period, in the format where each member is provided a response to the same set of questions, including favourite singer and favourite LP. The singer category produces an unusual response identical between Kerry and Ray of James Bauman, an English countertenor. It's easy to hear this influence in Kerry's singing, and presumably he'd turned Ray onto this. At this time, Ray lists Nucleus Elastic Rock as his favourite. This LP, recorded in January 1970, was an early work in the emerging genre of jazz rock fusion. Note that Carl Jenkins and John Marshall appear on this, a connection to the other LP bundles that I bought at the same time as Freehand. Many years later, in an interview, he references Frank Zappa and Hot Rats in particular. It's notable, I think, that the best-known piece from that LP, Peaches on Regalia, features just 3 musicians, using the then-used 16-track technology to full effect. Additionally, the record features Sugarcane Harris on violin, another obvious point of connection with Ray's skill set. Kerry's influences, as described by him, come from mainly what is known as classical music. I think it's notable that as well as Bach and Palestrina, he lists British, or more specifically English, composers such as Ralph Vaughan Williams, Frank Bridge and Edward Elgar. The other main strand of his influences is from medieval or Renaissance music, and this could be heard on virtually all of Giant's LPs. It's worth noting, though, that musicologist Dominic Stone writes, "Though in places the music may sound medieval, that does not mean it actually is medieval. Often these claims are in passing or as part of a review and lack a real musical basis." Derek, in later years, mentions Charlie Parker. "We listen to a lot of modern jazz, the American band Spirit and Frank Zappa." Lastly, in discussing influences, is the influence they had on each other. Although Ray and Kerry were writing separately by the time of Freehand, I can detect the influence of one on another in their writing and arrangements. For example, the close imitation in the parts of Playing the Game on the previous LP, or on Just the Same. Both Ray's compositions, but surely influenced by Kerry's contrapuntal style. These then are some of the influences on the writers. Let's look at the process now of composing the material. Both Kerry and Ray made use of tape recorders in their writing process. Among the trove of material contained in the Scraping the Barrel and Under Construction sets are excerpts from Kerry's work tapes. We hear him improvising at the piano, a free-flowing process, from which ideas for development are captured. Kerry describes this as, "You're trying to find something that has energy, an emotion, that makes a statement that you want to go back to." Ray describes a similar process, using a guitar and Revox recorder, finding an idea from improvising and then developing that, bouncing between channels on the recorder to build up detailed demos. Both he and Kerry would present demos in the form of cassette tapes to the others for them to learn their parts. Ray says that Kerry's were usually more complete, though from the evidence of his demos on the Scraping the Barrel and Under Construction sets, his demos too were substantially complete, barring the lyric. The LP opens with Just the Same, often described as a rocker, but one in which there seems to be simultaneously 6/4 and 7/4 going on at the same time, so not an obvious rocker. There's also a jaunty swinging feel to the playing, a lovely crisp beginning with the piano motif, quickly joined by the interlocking guitar, each instrument panned to opposing sides of the stereo picture. Ray's demo shows that, as they describe in talking about the writing process, the piece is essentially complete at this stage. Comparing the demo to the finished track, we can see how the ideas are orchestrated in the arrangement, such as the twin guitar lick that appears as a pair of synth lines providing texture. Cleverer minds than mine have determined that the piano and guitar are playing in 7/4 and the bass and drums in 6/4. How does that even work and still manage to swing? I'm Just Doing What I Want to Do sits firmly in 6/4 and really grooves. The B section, again all shown on the demo, is a slow 4/4 tune played on guitar against a wash of synth strings and lovely subliminal vibes. An ascending chromatic keyboard figure leads back to the A section, with the saxophones riffing behind a fantastic squiggly solo from Kerry Minnear on Mini Moog. As with all his improvising, there's a lovely combination of structure, texture and unusual note selection, which takes us far beyond typical prog synth noodling. We come out of the solo and into a brief moment of solo guitar riffing over hand claps, before the final verse and fade in which the finger clicks reappear to provide a coda to the piece. On reflection, a tour de force written by Kerry Minnear, a 4-part vocal fugue opens the piece. It's perhaps the most striking piece on the first listen to the LP. The casual observer might think that this was nothing but studio trickery achieved with overdubs, but of course they also performed it live. Soaked in reverb, suggestive of a cathedral and English choral tradition, we hear Derek first, then Ray, Kerry and Gary. We can hear the sibling similarities in the Shawns' voices. Ascending diminished chords are resolved in the simple harmonies of all around, all around. The fugue is repeated, this time with instruments doubling the vocal lines. Then there's a segue into the middle section with Kerry's lovely lead vocal, at first over simple chords on a harp. This apparently found in the studio from a previous session and co-opted into this piece. The vocal is in 2 tracks, panned to create a slight overlapping effect. Delicate instrumentation is added as the section develops, with first recorder and celeste, then violin and vibes. The look back, it's not your game, is echoed with tuned percussion. The all-around refrain returns, punctuated twice, once by a violin-led bar that sounds for all the world like folk rockers' Steel I Span, and then by tuned percussion before we come to the joyous instrumental arrangement of the fugue. Notable here is the nimble upper register bass playing and the lovely variation when it drops into the lower octave. Freehand. The opening piano motif initially suggests A minor, but then a parallel line is added a minor third away, giving the line a sense of unease and an ambiguous key until raised bass entry. We hear intricate layers of keyboards as the semiquaver or 16th note figure is developed, initially sitting on the first 5 notes of the scale, but then with larger intervals as the harmony develops. The arrival in bar 6 at a kind of C/F sharp chord is dramatic. If it's not too far-fetched to say, the harmonic effect in this passage is reminiscent of Stravinsky, whose famous combination of an F sharp major triad, all black notes on the piano, and a C major triad, all white notes, was to be known as the Petrushka chord. Around the unrelenting semiquaver figures in the keyboards, bass and guitar play independently moving melodic lines. The whole together creates a driving, unsettled feel coloured by the shifting harmonies. The introduction climaxes with a typical giant interlocking figure between bass and guitar, arriving in unison at the pickup to the main riff on clavinet. The introduction to Freehand is melodic, inventive, intricate clockwork, and it epitomises the sense of their music having a densely packed atomic structure into which lots of musical information is compressed. This connects perhaps to the fact that although quite short, Freehand as an LP is just 36 minutes and 52 seconds, it doesn't seem so. In his reaction video on YouTube channel The Daily Doug, Doug Helvering, listening to this, says it oozes musicality. Precisely. And if it's not stretching the interpretation of this opening too far, I know it probably is, I'd like to mention 2 other correspondences. In discussing influences on the composers, I referenced Steve Reich, and I hear this in the opening figure, the chromatic shifts that give different character to the same motif, illuminating it from a subtly different angle. There's also a detectable influence of J.S. Bach. Consider how it looks on the page. Here's Phil Smith's transcription of Freehand, and here's a section of the Prelude in C minor from Book 1 of the 48. Anyway, back to the rock. When the clavinet riff arrives, we're clearly in F sharp minor, and the keys and guitar double on the riff. Derek can't believe the situation, being in control at last. The lyric for the title piece expounds on their escape from the clutches of previous contracts and management and looks forward. Derek says, lyrically it was partly abstract, but as the album title suggests, it was about getting out of the record deals and ugly contractual obligations, and I think we felt free and at ease. A unison bass and guitar figure, syncopated in 6/4, speeds past, lasting only 9 bars, which would have sustained an entire piece for many acts. The central instrumental section is one of the highlights of the LP. Earlier themes reappear, such as the bass from the introduction. Subtle percussion with bass, drum and cymbal underscores the glistening keyboard-led melodies and angular guitar figures. Note Ray's lovely vibrato at the end of the bass phrases. Kerry always avoids empty virtuosity, but has the technique to make the little ascending scale to the repeat of the theme sound effortless. The dreamy mood is abruptly shattered by gnarly ascending guitar chords before the earlier mood is re-established. This happens again, leading to a vintage piece of giant interlocking stereo motifs that provides the clever build-up to the clavinet riff and out of the central section with a fantastic John Wells entry as the riff comes back. A quirky coda ends the piece with a pump. Time to Kill. The early video game, Pong, was recorded on Gary's trusty cassette recorder. Again, the demo provides all the material, and evidently the idea of the intro cutting across something was always part of the design. Comparison of the demo and the finished piece shows how subtle touches of colour are provided by the instrument choices in the orchestration. By and by, the tune arrives down a little side track or byway. Lots of fourths in the chords of the guitar and piano parts, and half-tone shifts with a key not obviously established. A simple two-note motif in fourths builds tension that then resolves as the key then settles in the verse, while alternating sections in 4 with sections in 5, but somehow maintaining a swinging momentum. After a chorus, the guitar leads down a dizzying set of chromatic snares in triplets against 4s in the descending keyboard sequence. In the second verse, subtle percussion gets added, a triangle sparkles in the background. A contrasting section then doubles voice and bass guitar in unison, rising with 2 closely written backing vocals. Although the vocal parts sound very much like Kerry's work, these are clearly part of the demo. Fourths again giving a sparse suspended feel to the harmony. The bass seems to pedal 1/5 in the key of F sharp, this figure then appearing in E flat before the verse returns, heralded by great drum accents, push bits or grabs as Weathers describes them, but up a tone in B this time. On the fade, Ray's incredible bass part, cleverly providing a bass line and a tenor part, all the while swinging. The importance of John Weathers to the sound must be mentioned. He really does glue the whole thing together, never overcomplicating but finding the right accents, the right fills, and managing cleverly to combine a solid rock feel with an element of swing. The liner notes for one of the later releases of Freehand has Derek describing his vocal on this tune as sounding a little like Cliff Richard. And it's a little known fact, he was under consideration after Phil left. His Last Voyage. Incredible though side 1 of this LP is, this is surely the outstanding piece on the record. And I'm not alone in this choice as a favourite on the LP, both Ray and John cite it as theirs. Kerry Minear's English melancholy and the influence of the English choral tradition loom large in this piece. The opening has a solo bass getting entwined with vibes and guitar, dense counterpoint that hangs suspended, free-floating, abstract. At the vocal entry, the counterpoint gives way to a simpler, sparse acoustic guitar, each phrase ending on a suspended chord. Then the chorus, with alternating 7/4 and 4/4 bars, keeping us guessing where the beat is, yet the melody rides smoothly over the top. Another verse then gives way to a repeat of the opening counterpoint. Verse and intro then repeat again, but this time a descending figure heralds a key change to F minor, with piano, bass and drums giving a jazz feel, but almost as soon as it gets going is decorated by a cascading piano figure, accompanied by terrific drum fills, conveying the growing storm. 3 ideas at once, the rocking swing of the vamp, the jagged descending piano figures, and a cool 3-part vocal canon on the top. The parts run close, each entry 2 beats later. Then squalls of guitar in the jazzy central section, building to a terrific climax where the downbeat is revealed. Where we can see that The bass figure that opens the piece starts on 4 and rather than 1. An elegant coda rounds out the piece. Talybont. An instrumental named after a village in Wales, where our engineer Gary Martin lived, says John. This was apparently intended for the soundtrack of a film of Robin Hood, and mostly features Ray and Kerry basically recreating the demo they had made in the studio. The music was never used and got recycled for free hand. Helmdale, the film company, was part of the same group of companies as WWA, so it may be that the material predates their Chrysalis deal. A simple tune that alternates between a modal sounding A section and a B section that modulates, scored for recorders and harpsichord. It's also a tune that exemplifies the Baroque or Renaissance strand of giant music, and for the same reason is strongly disliked by those who don't get Gentle Giant. The A section gets treated with some clever delay and gating, producing a kind of medieval dub sound. The B section that follows this is scored with 4 recorders, and the effect is pleasingly lush after the clipped electronic section that precedes it. Ray's bass sound in the duet with the keyboard is absolutely delicious. The tune gets chased around with its counter melody and the fade. It's light-hearted, almost a throwaway that asks little of the listener, and which would have been more suited to a TV series than a feature film. I can imagine it on Tull's Songs from the Wood LP. Regular Sunday tea time exposure could even have made it an unlikely hit, TV theme tunes making the singles chart regularly in the 70s. Mobile. This brims with confidence in its opening. The opening 6/8 figure on violin and acoustic guitar suggests folk music. Gary makes the point, in the liner notes to Scraping the Barrel, that he thought the idea must have come to Ray when playing the violin, but Ray's demo makes clear that this was a guitar figure. Again, the demo provides a firm template that is cleverly arranged. After the folk-like introduction, the main riff on electric instruments perhaps has a nod towards Jethro Tull. The Scraping the Barrel liner notes also reveal that the cross rhythm on the bell of the ride cymbal was Gary's idea, and very effective it is. Around the 1 minute 30-second mark, the piece heads down an unusual giant byway. In the on-track book, writer Gary Steele says that this track contains unusual nodules of interesting musicality, and this is one of those. Some listeners hear this track as filler, which gives the album a weak finish, but to my ears there's plenty going on here. Some good instrumental textures, excellent wah violin, and muscular bass and guitar. The ascending bass line is majestic in the chorus. Indeed, the bass part gets recognition in what would almost certainly now be called the bass community, as can be seen on this 2017 magazine cover describing Ray's freakishly large bass line. Fast-flowing lines head into a filtered vocal, and then into a section where we're almost back in the sound world of Talybont, with dueling wah-wah violins over a jaunty bass part. This makes me wonder if the folksy jig-type theme was perhaps originally also conceived for the Robin Hood film. Gary's guitar has a snarling riff, and there's a grooving piano figure before the last verse, and a terrific coda with a unison note allowed to fade. We've looked in detail at the 7 tracks that make up the record, and I want to round out part 2 with a brief consideration of Kerry's input to this record. Kerry is surely man of the match here. Gentle Giant were most definitely a band of equals, and the atmosphere collegiate and collaborative, so it seems invidious to single one player out. But if Gary's sound dominates on The Power and Glory, Kerry provides the memorable instrumental voice here. Not only is his playing faultlessly executed, providing subtle colouring, but compositionally, the consistency of his work on freehand represents a high point in his writing for the band. Though perhaps eclipsed individually by Design on the next LP, the material here is really strong. Part 3. We've looked at the background to the LP, its composition and recording, and the pieces themselves. Part 3 looks at its release and the post-release life of the material. Freehand is housed in a sleeve with graphics by Richard Evans, from a design by the band. He has an extensive portfolio of LP sleeves. The interpretation is straightforward and literal, an illustration of a free hand, actually Ray's, with the previous state of tied hands depicted in the photograph on the mantelpiece. The era of restriction is in the past, it's memorialised as a piece of history in the photograph. The background appears to be a palm print. The unconnected hand emerges from the background, reminding me a bit of the old horror picture in which a disembodied hand roamed around strangling its victims. The back sleeve uses the handprint in a subtle grey-green with a border of interlocking hands, and features the title in a blocky font defined by shadows, and has the Giant logo at the foot of the credits. The band's names appear, but no instrumental credits. Also credited Gary Martin and Paul Northfield. The original Chrysalis release has the solid green/red butterfly label. The Chrysalis imprint and releases followed the template of Blackwell's Island label in its pink label period. Diverse artists given a large degree of freedom, with releases always recognisable from an iconic label design. In America, the record appeared on Capitol. Freehand received some favourable reviews at the time and was promoted to some effect by Chrysalis. As far as it's documented, the record appeared briefly at number 48 on the US Billboard chart. In the era of large sales, what would that have meant in numbers? In Britain, it appeared in the low reaches of various music press top 30s, but not the official BMRB chart. Sales were never good at home, though bigger in Italy, Germany and Canada. In any event, it was their best-selling record. A more in-depth contemporary review appeared in the specialist Contemporary Keyboard magazine. It describes a maturity that few groups can boast. In mind of Ray's comment that Power and Glory could have been more tuneful, the idea that the LP was a conscious effort to move away from the Webern rock of their previous album is on the money. Praising Kerry as one of rock's most interesting keyboard players, the reviewer writes, "Minear's lines weave in and out of maze-like rhythmic structures with a grace that reflects the touch of a master architect." This is a very effective description of his contribution. The reviewer goes on to say that Just the Same reveals Minear's ability to blend into the arrangements. I think this describes well both the music and the way in which Kerry's technical and musical ability are always harnessed in the service of the material and the group's sound, and not virtuoso showboating. The three pieces on side one quickly became staples of their live set and remained so until the end of the band's touring life in 1980. As with other Giant music, all three were rearranged for live performance. Just the Same getting a coda to link it into the opening of Proclamation, while the other two got substantial reworkings. All appear on the official double live album that appeared a couple of years later. On the autumn US tour, their appearance at the White Plains Music Hall, White Plains, New York, on October the 7th was bootlegged and released on the amazing Corniphone record label as Amongst the Darkers. It seems incredible that a relatively obscure act would have attracted the attention of bootleggers, whose primary targets were the likes of Dylan, The Stones, Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd. Two Gentle Giant releases appear in the infamous Babylon Books bootleg guide. The other one, Playing the Fool, from an earlier tour, gave the name to the official live release. Both items are worthy of any Giant collection. These vinyl releases must have been small runs and are historic artefacts. Amongst the Darkers is a belter and features two tunes from Freehand. In 1975 there was also a cassette release, as was standard for the day. Because of the need to balance the playing lengths on each side, the track listing is different. On Reflection and His Last Voyage are swapped. CD-wise, the 1998 Beat Goes On release is a nice combo with their next LP, Interview. More about that in a bit. It has a sleeve note by Alan Kinsman. The 1990 One Way Records release is interesting because it was compiled from the wrong master and has different mixes. The Gentle Giant website identifies a number of these. Particularly obvious is Derek's vocal in Time to Kill, the "and with no questions" section where we're used to hearing Kerry. This mix presumably showing Derek's guide vocal.
Tomorrow's never dawn, only today. Content within his time.
It's all a bit rough and ready, but fascinating to hear a different slant. The band's own release, the Deluxe Edition, was remastered from a 96K transfer of the original quarter-inch stereo mix. It adds a second disc with Ray's surround sound mix made from the original quad mix, as well as liner notes with input from Derek and Ray. It's in a slipcase if you like that kind of thing. This sounds much louder than the other CD releases, including the Steven Wilson remix. Steven Wilson has been remixing his way through prog's back pages. Yes and Jethro Tull have both had the treatment. Wilson has now remixed all the available earlier Gentle Giant material with the promise of at least Interview and the missing piece still to come. His mixes are not to everyone's taste, although he's invariably respectful of the original mixes that listeners will be familiar with. To my ears, it sounds as though each element of the mix has been taken out, buffed up, and then replaced in the same spot. Some people hear this as resulting in the destruction of the organic whole, with a sense of lots of unconnected bits. I don't hear it like that, and it's notable that Ray, promoting the Giant release, says that the only things they asked him to change were a couple of places where specific attention was needed exactly to ensure that interlocking parts continued to work effectively. Ray, unsentimental about the catalogue, also said he would have been happy for Wilson to have made a more radical remix. The CD of the Wilson remix is noticeably quieter than the band's deluxe edition. In the end, different mixes are just that, different, and who can say which is better? Wilson's stereo mix certainly does reveal some additional detail, but the surround mix is well worth hearing, with On Reflection being the outstanding track, the 4-voice arrangement lending itself naturally to the format. Some lovely electric piano detail is revealed in Time to Kill, and in His Last Voyage there's a better balance between the voices and rhythm section on the fugal middle part. The 5.1 mix is certainly better than the original quad mixes, less cluttered, better separation. In fact, the quad mix didn't sound good to me at all, with some of the guitar parts missing to my ears. Now, while Giant are not the obvious band to cover, there are a surprising number of cover versions of their material, ranging across all their LPs, including Freehand. Head over to my incredible Gentle Giant covers playlist to hear some of these, including an excellent brass arrangement of On Reflection. Freehand was the high point for Giant. Their next LP, Interview, was nowhere near as successful, and in places reverted to the rather more abrasive style of The Power and the Glory. So while Freehand avoids this kind of thing, on Interview we're back with this. Now I enjoy a bit of that, but it's not radio friendly and unlikely to bring new listeners in. Gary describes this LP as digging into the gnarly bag. It was another recording made in something of a hurry and does have some strong similarities to Freehand. There's another a cappella piece, Design, perhaps Kerry's finest moment, and a lot of very tight playing with a slightly crisper sound. Around this time there was mention in an interview that a double LP would be a possibility. So indulge me as we imagine what a double LP from this era might have looked like. They were never a band who arrived at their records through jamming in the studio. As we have seen, they arrived at the studio with the material written and rehearsed. Space was left to develop aspects of the arrangements as they recorded, but these aren't entire tunes based on a guitar riff with some lyrics improvised on the spot. Consequently, in contrast to many other acts, there was never much in the way of outtakes from their studio sessions. The discarding of material took place much earlier in the process, as Ray and Kerry composed. So we can't populate the notional double LP with long-lost epics or radically different versions, but here's my running order. In a parallel part of the multiverse, there's another version of this in which generous amounts of writing and rehearsal time over the period 1975 to 6 give rise to a double LP with a full side-long piece and large helpings of Gary and Kerry soloing over the Amazing Giant rhythm section. But back in the known universe, I'm happy this remarkable record exists just as it does. I've not lost my enjoyment of it in nearly 50 years of listening. The Proclamation fanzine poll, albeit a very small sample, placed it at the top of the list. And the LP tracks are strongly represented in the fans' top 20. The Stephen Wilson remix prompted various promotional activities, and Derek, Ray and John all gave lengthy interviews. It's clear that unlike fans, for them once an LP was finished they moved on and didn't dwell on things. But they do all rate the record. Ray says, "It's strange enough that it could only be us. I think it holds up pretty good, but I'm not the one to say." John says, "I didn't think it was anything more special at the time, but I listened to it recently and went, wow."